All right, so today we're starting with chapter 10, which is our new chapter. Also brings us into our new outcome, which is outcome 2, unit 2. And chapter 10 is kind of similar to chapter 9, but we're kind of extending our knowledge of social psychology. So now we're trying to look at, okay, we understand how we make judgments of other people in our environment. We understand this concept of social cognition. Now we want to understand what are some social influences that cause people to behave in different ways, that cause people to think in different ways or to feel differently. So that's essentially what the entire chapter 10 is about. And chapter 10 is a very long chapter. Okay, so chapter 10 is all about social influences on behavior. And today we're only going to cover the first spread, which talks about, status, power, and this idea of groups and how this affects the way we think, feel, and behave. Because remember, it's all about linking it back to those thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Whenever we do a topic, we're always linking back to those three things. So before we actually go through the rest of the topics, we have to understand, okay, what is a social influence? So how would we define social influence in psychology terms? So remember, a social influence is any kind of effect, and that is an effect that we experience either because of the presence of other people or because of the actions of other people. Okay, so we could be socially influenced just because somebody is in the room, or we could be socially influenced because of something that somebody does. But it doesn't always take somebody doing something to influence us. Okay, so for example, when you're in class, if your coordinator walks into the room or your principal walks into the room, all of you will start to behave very differently from how you were behaving when there was no other teacher or no other person in the room there. That's a social influence. And that coordinator or that principal doesn't even have to open their mouth or say a word. They don't have to do a thing. Just their presence makes you behave differently and influences you. Okay, their actions can also influence you. So if they go around the class with a clipboard, looking you up and down and ticking something off, you might start to think that they're doing a uniform check. Okay, and then you start to get a bit anxious and agitated. All right, so that's essentially what we mean when we say a social influence is not just the effect of a presence of a person in a room. It could also be the actual actions that person does that make you, that allow you to be influenced. Okay, now when we're talking about social influences can be real or they can be imagined. So real means like when the actual principal walks into the room, that's a real person there, that's a real social influence. Sometimes the social influences that you feel can be in your head, in the sense that a person isn't actually threatening, a person isn't actually in a position that they've got authority over you, but you feel like they do. And a lot of the time when we see things like peer pressure, that's what happens, okay? With peer pressure, you've got people around you who are of equal status to you, they're just your peers, but for some reason you imagine that they've got a higher power over you to influence you to do things, and that when they taunt you or they tell you, come on, just give this cigarette a try, or just drink some alcohol, what's the big deal, you feel influenced by that. Okay, even though those people are no better than you in terms of their authority or in terms of their ability to boss you around. Okay, now how these social pressures impact our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So like I said before, social influences always influence something. They always have an effect on something, and the effect that they have is either on our thoughts, either on our feelings, or on our behaviors. Okay, so that's essentially what social influences can have. So just to link it back to the example we were talking about before, if the principal or the year level coordinator is to walk into the room, that might affect your thoughts. You might start to think, oh my God, why are they in the room? What's going on? That might start to affect your feelings. You might start to feel a little bit, upset because maybe you're wearing the wrong uniform. Or that might start to affect your behavior, which, as a teacher, you see a lot. You see students trying to ease out of their jackets and, try to get the right jumper on, or like remove something that's not actually right. So that's essentially how a social influence in that example could affect your behavior. Okay, so that's basically the definition. And this is a very, very important definition, and you need to know these key words. Whatever words I've colored here in different colors, that's very important for you to know. So that's a key definition. Now, social influences can be constructive, which means that they're good for you. They can be destructive in the case of, for example, peer pressure. We know that peer pressure a lot of the time can be negative in nature. Or social influences can be neutral. Now, when could social influences be neutral? Well, if somebody around you isn't somebody you know, or isn't somebody who has a lot of power over you, just a stranger, you're not going to be affected by their behavior or by what they do. Okay. In the case of your peers or your friends, you know them, so you're likely to be influenced by them. Okay. And social influences can be positive when it's somebody you look up to. So if, for example, your favorite celebrity does something or donates to a particular charity, or encourages his or her followers to, buy a certain type of skincare product because they don't test on animals or whatever, that could be constructive, because obviously that's encouraging you to do something positive, like donating to charity. Okay, so essentially, whether your social influence is constructive, destructive, or neutral, the simple fact is that we can't deny that every day, either consciously or subconsciously, we are influenced by the people around us. Okay, and by people within our social environment or within the social media context that we explore. So how do we respond to social influences? Well, you can decide to either give in or to resist. Give in is when you succumb. Give in is when you say, okay, I accept this social influence and I accept the change that it will have on me. So if you're driving down the road and a policeman signals you to stop the car because he wants to give you a breath test, you can't really resist that. You have to kind of accept, and you will accept, because you know that there will be consequences for you driving away. Okay, you can't just run away. That is a person in authority who has a lot of power, similar to your principal, similar to a year level coordinator. They've got a lot of power over society. Okay, and we can't just run away from that. So we tend to give in to those kinds of situations. Okay, we might resist though. If we are a really headstrong person, and we are able to say, no, I don't want to give in to peer pressure. I know that smoking is wrong, or I know that doing this thing is wrong and it's risky for my health and for my well-being. If you're a confident enough person, you might be able to resist that and just say, no, I don't want to do that. Okay. And obviously your ability to either give in or resist to any kind of social influence or pressure is essentially determined by your personality. Are you a very confident, headstrong person? Because confident, headstrong people tend to be able to resist social influence a lot better than people who are a little bit more shy or timid or lacking self-esteem or self-confidence. Okay. So social influences, that's basically what social influence is about. I'll just talk about this little Aldi thing here. So if any of you have ever gone to Aldi, you'll notice that they scan things very quickly. And I actually had to talk about this with reference to the imagined. Okay, when we think about social influences that are imagined. So whenever I go Aldi, like once in a while, like I'll realize that when there's a lot of people standing behind me in the queue and the guy is like scanning my items like at 100 kilometers per hour, I get really stressed and I get really anxious and I'm like fumbling and trying to pack everything really quickly. And those people probably don't even have an issue with how I'm packing. They're probably just waiting in the line thinking about what they're going to cook for dinner. But for some reason, I feel like I'm holding up the entire line in Aldi because I'm packing too slow. So again, that's another way, another example of when a social influence can be imagined. It doesn't actually exist, but we just kind of think in our head that people are, pressuring us to pack our groceries quicker. Okay, but yeah, that's just that example there. Okay, so that's social influence and the definition of what a social influence is. Now, before we go on further, we also need to understand what is the definition of a group, okay? Because a lot of the time, social influences and the idea of power, the idea of status, they only exist because of the existence of something that we call groups, okay? Now, a group is any collection of two or more people, okay? In order for you to have a group, you need to have two or more people. An individual cannot be a group, okay? And that's why we say no man is an island, okay? No man can be a group in and of themselves. They need to have other people there. So essentially, when we're talking about groups, the first criteria for a group is that there needs to be two or more people. The second criteria for a group is that those two or more people need to interact with and influence one another. And this can't just be in a one-time setting. This actually has to be over time. Okay, so if I'm waiting at the bus stop and I'm interacting with the people next to me, talking about how the bus is always delayed or something like that, or talking about the weather or something like that, I can't really say that that's an example of a group. I can't write this thing. Okay, over time. All right, so essentially you have to be consistently interacting with them, not just a one-time interaction. And the final thing is that you need to share a common purpose with them. So you guys need to have the same goal, or you need to be at that particular place for the same reason, okay? And sometimes we have situations where we do share a common goal, but that doesn't necessarily make you a group. So I'll give you, just with reference to the pictures on this slide, we'll go through a few examples here. So the first one is, you know, these three people walking. They look like they've just gone on a little lunch break, just gotten a coffee for themselves. And these people would be considered a group. Okay, and the reason these people would be considered a group is that they work together. They are two or more people. Because they work together, they would interact with each other on a daily basis. Okay, similar to how people in any workplace who see each other frequently would interact with each other over time. Okay, and they share a common purpose because they're all working at the same job. Okay, they know that when they get their coffee, they've got to be back at work by a particular time. So they all share a common purpose there. This group over here, the boys that are in yellow in the crowd here, they could be considered a group, okay, because they're all wearing the same kind of uniform. They look like they're all friends. They're standing close to each other. They're all cheering on for their team. But you have to remember that these boys in yellow could be considered a group, but the people around them are not a group with them, okay? So the people that are just sitting, looking somewhere else, just doing their own thing, all of these people together cannot be considered a group. The people in yellow in the picture itself can be considered to be a group. And the reason that this whole audience at the MCG cannot be considered a total group is that they're all strangers, okay? Usually when you go to a game or you go to a match, you don't interact with every single person in that stadium. You interact with the people that you've come with, your friends who are sitting with you, and those are the people you're interacting with over time. Even though everyone else in the stadium shares a common purpose of watching the game with you, that doesn't mean that everyone in the stadium can be considered as one group, okay? The people you sit with can be considered one group, okay? And so that's why we say these boys can be considered a group. Now, when you're in class, the people you sit with in class, whether it's your psychology class or your biology class or whatever class it is, they can be considered a group because that is a group of two or more people. That is a group that you are interacting with over time, okay? Sometimes when you do group activities in class, sometimes you just see someone in the hallway, you ask them, okay, when's our SAC? Okay, you do interact with these people over time. They are your classmates. And you share a common purpose of basically trying to complete unit 1 and 2 of any subject with those people. You all have the same end goal. So these three examples that I just talked about, these can be considered as groups. The two examples that might not be considered groups, which I've written here on the slide, is the people waiting for a train or a bus. So if you're waiting for a train at Flinders Street Station, that's not a group because even though we've got two or more people in this picture, these people are not interacting with and influencing one another over time consistently, okay? They just see each other when they're leaving work to go home, and they never see each other again maybe. Okay, these people who are waiting in an elevator, they're usually all strangers, okay? They share a common purpose of taking the elevator, but as per our definition, they're not a group, okay? Because they're not interacting with and influencing one another over time. When this guy gets to his floor, he will get off the elevator, and that's the end of that. So it's important for you to remember that even though our definition of group has these three distinguishing or three selecting criteria, that certain groups will not qualify to be considered a group, okay? For example, this would not be considered a group and this example here would not be considered a group either, okay, as per our definition. So make sure you are clear and you are able to distinguish between what is a group and what isn't a group. All right, so now that we've understood this idea of what is and what isn't a group and what are the three criteria that we need to have a group, we can start to understand these social ideas or social concepts of status and social power. Now, status is something we all know. We've all heard of the word status at some point or the other. We have an idea of what it means, but we need to define this from a psychological point of view as well. Okay, so essentially what status means is it's the individual's position within the group, okay? So a certain individual's position within the group, and that is not a position that society gives them. That's not a position that, is universally known. That's a position that is given to them by the other members of the group. Okay, so essentially what that means is that how others in the group view them and judge them and the kind of attention that others in the group give them determines that particular character status. And for those of you who have watched this movie, Mean Girls is a very good social critique and a really good movie that shows you, the psychological concepts of status and social power, okay? Because in the movie, we know that, Regina George is only really powerful because the other girls give her that ability or give her that power, and they give her that status, okay, and they view her as being such a important person, okay. But the minute that they decide that no, we are our own individuals, they kind of stop giving her that attention, okay, and then the power kind of shifts to Katie, who becomes the new leader of the plastics, okay. So essentially that is what we mean when we say that it's perceived by members of the group, okay? The attention you allow yourself to give the leader of the group is the status that they will eventually have. Now, status isn't just something we can talk about when we talk about, girl cliques and that kind of stuff. We can even talk about it with reference to other things, like in The Simpsons, for example. Every member of the family in The Simpsons has a particular status, okay? So Lisa, for example, is often portrayed as the smart one. Bart is often portrayed as the cheeky one, the naughty one that's always getting into trouble. Okay, Marge is often portrayed as the organized one, the logical one of the family. Okay, Homer is often perceived as the lazy one, the one that will try anything, to get out of doing hard work. So essentially, each of those characters in that family, based on how the director's written it up, based on how the characters treat each other in each of the episodes, they each have their own status as well. Okay, and if you extend this example to your own families or your own friendship groups, you would realize that in your own friendship groups, you've got someone who would be classified as, being the organized one, being the funny one, being the, the one that's not afraid to question authority, that kind of stuff. So that's essentially what status is about. Now, the more status you have in a group, essentially the more power you have in that group. And so now we're coming to this idea of power. So what is power? Power is the ability to control or influence the thoughts, feelings, or behavior of another person or group. Okay, so being the leader of the plastics, Regina George was able to influence how the rest of the characters in her group behaved to a certain extent. Okay, essentially that is what power is. It's your ability to control or influence the thoughts, feelings, or behavior. Okay, it doesn't always have to be behavior. It could even just be thoughts and feelings. Okay, so obviously she was able to influence Katie that her original clothes that she wore were really not fashionable, and make her change the way that she dressed, okay, and the way that she spoke, the kind of language she used, all that kind of stuff. So power is important, and whenever power is used in a social interaction for some purpose, we call that social power. Okay, so if you use your social power to, for example, exclude someone from sitting with you at the lunch table, or if you use your social power to, for example, get your way, or exclude someone, or include someone, or make a stand or bring light to an important issue, that is an example of social power. Okay, and the last thing that we're going through today is the different types of social power that we have. Okay, so the last topic, like I said, is the types of social power. So we've got 6 types of social power that we can use at any time. The 6 types of social power that you use will be dependent on who you are, that is your role or your duty or your occupation, the specific situation you find yourself in or you find yourself dealing with, as well as your overall status as a person. Okay, and usually you can use one or more of these social power at the same time. Okay, so if I'm an expert in something, I might use my expertise or my informational power at the same time. Okay, so you can use 2 or more of these at the same time. Now you can use the memory tip RICE-LR to remember the 6 types of social power. So you've got R for referent, I for informational, C for coercive, E for expert, L for legitimate, and R for reward power. So we're going to go through a quick overview of what these are on the next slide. And I've just literally taken this table from your book because it is a good table and it gives you all the information on one page. So the first type of power is reward power. Now, reward power is when you've got power because you have the ability to dole out or to give out a positive consequence or remove a negative consequence. So essentially, if you work at a particular workplace, your boss has the ability to either give you a pay rise or give you a promotion, okay, or reduce your current pay for that matter. As a teacher, I can give you guys particular grades, okay? I can give you guys, particular, consequences. So if you're not behaving in class, I can keep you in for a lunchtime detention, or, I can give you demerit points for bad behavior, all that kind of stuff. So that is reward power. You have the power because you've got the ability to either reward a person or remove some harm from a person. Coercive power is basically your ability to give a negative consequence, okay? So negative consequence means that you're able to either give a negative consequence, like a detention or something, or you're able to remove a positive consequence. So essentially, an employer can sack an employee, so they've got that power over them. Like I said before, this is more towards this example, a teacher can give a detention, or they can not allow a student to attend a school excursion. Legitimate power is, and remember the word coercive. To coerce someone is to force somebody to do something or to get out of doing something. So coercive is more negative, okay? It's a more negative connotation compared to reward. So that's how you know. Reward power is when you're giving a reward or something good. Coercive power is when you're giving something bad, a negative consequence. Legitimate power is when a person's legitimate authority that they have in society allows them to have power over other people and control other people who've got less authority than them. So when we talk about legitimate power, as the example here shows the picture, we're talking about like policemen, we're talking about people who are CEOs or managers, okay? We're talking about maybe the principal of a school, okay? All that kind of stuff is legitimate power, because you realize that those people have this legitimate authority over you. They're not like fake. They are real people with genuine authority to arrest you or put you in jail or give you a fine, okay? All this kind of stuff. Referent power is people that you refer to, okay? Referent coming from the word refer. You refer to those people as someone that you like, you look up to. They're your role model, they're your idol. You idolize them, in other words, okay? And you want to be like that person, okay? So if Ariana, for example, posts something on her Instagram about a charity that she's donating towards, and she tells her followers that they should also donate if they've got enough money, then her followers will obviously do that because they look up to her. And she has the power to influence them to do that. Okay, that's what referent power is. Expert power is when you think about someone who's an expert, okay, in their particular industry, or an expert in particular knowledge. Okay, whenever we see these coronavirus updates on TV, these news channels, they often bring in like some kind of a infectious agent specialist, or infectious disease specialist from some university, and then they start talking about coronavirus, and we listen to them because we know that that person has expertise in that subject. They've studied many years about the importance of controlling infectious diseases, and we believe them. The same thing with a university lecturer or professor, as we see in this picture here. Okay. Informational power. Informational power is having resources or information that are useful and not available elsewhere. Sometimes we can get informational power from someone who's an expert, like a university lecturer, or a tutor, for example, who did the subject last year and did well. But sometimes we can't find information elsewhere. So sometimes this lady, for example, who's pregnant, she might speak to her friend who just gave birth 2 years ago and get information from this friend about her firsthand experiences of being pregnant and what it was like to be pregnant. And this is information she might not be able to find on the internet or in any other place. Okay, so that's informational power. When you've got information that basically is very valuable to someone else, and thus this lady has some kind of power over what kind of information she can disclose to this other lady who's currently pregnant. Okay, so that's essentially the types of social power. So with reference to this topic, you should definitely know, be able to define each source of power, or at least differentiate between them. It doesn't have to be a word-to-word definition, but as long as how you describe that clearly differentiates it from another type of power. And obviously an example. So there's multiple examples here on this slide for each type of social power. You can just choose any one example for each. We won't ask you for more than one example for each one. Okay, so those are the types of social power. And essentially that brings us to the end of today's PowerPoint, or today's topic spread. So the work that you need to do for today is 10.1. questions 1A, 2, and 5, 10.3, questions 1 and 2, and 10.5, which is all. Now, all just means that it's a bunch of different types of power examples, and you're just going to identify, okay, is it coercive power? Is it reward power? It's a really easy question there, 10.5. Okay, now I want you guys to, when you're done with this, I want you to submit this via Due Work when you are done. And if you're confused with any of the questions, just feel free to email me and I can help you with that. Okay, so with that, I am ending the recording for today.